How do you design clear and readable data graphics? There are many chart features out there that can actually hinder communication to your audience. So a lot of the work you'll be doing on your data graphics will come in the refinement stage. Unfortunately, many of the tools out there still don't follow common readability or legibility principles for design. To illustrate some of the common pitfalls in data graphic design, we'll go through a simple exercise designed by Stephen Few. Take a look at these two graphs. Which graph is easier to determine whether mid-cap U.S. stock or small-cap U.S. stock has a greater share? Is it the pie chart or the bar graph? If you selected the bar graph, you're correct. But why? Studies have found that it's actually more difficult for people to judge differences in area of a pie than it is for them to judge differences in length of bars. Which of these line graphs is easier to read, the 2D or 3D line graph? If you selected the 2D line graph, you're correct. Making objects in a graph appear in 3D adds no extra information and usually makes the values harder to read and compare. Which of these tables is easier to read, Table A or Table B? If you guess Table B, you're correct. But why? Well, the grid, the fill colors, the unnecessary precision, and the redundant use of dollar signs all distract from the data that make it unnecessarily difficult to read and compare values. Which graph is easier to focus on the pattern of change through time over the individual values? Well, when you're looking to compare data over time, line graphs always work best. Bars work for comparing differences in magnitude, but when you need to see the shape of a change over time, nothing is more effective than a line graph. Which graph presents the data more accurately, Graph A or Graph B? Well, Graph B is correct. Notice in Graph A that the bar height begins at 2000 instead of a 0 baseline. Here, the respective height differences have been greatly exaggerated. Which map makes it easier to find all the countries with positive growth rates? If you selected Map A, you're correct. Map B requires you to memorize the meaning of 7 colors, which exceeds the limits of short-term memory. The legend is useful, but requires the user to keep cross-referencing it to interpret the graphic. With Map A, you can easily recall the meaning of dark gray and light gray, and the rest is intuitive. Which graph makes it easier to determine R&D's travel expenses? 3D effects make graphs hard to read and can hide the values altogether. The small multiples display allows for easy comparison of all the bars. Which graph has easy-to-read labels? Graph A or Graph B? Hopefully you can see that Graph A is much easier to read. Vertically oriented or angled text is much harder to read than horizontal-oriented text. Which graph is easier to look at? Well, bright colors are great for making important things stand out, but when they're overused, nothing stands out, and it becomes difficult to focus on the data. Which table allows you to see the areas of poor performance more quickly? Table A or Table B? Again, overuse of color is distracting. When everything is colored, the most important things don't jump out like they should. In this short exercise, you observe those features of graph design that can hinder and help communication. Make your chart stand out by referring to these design principles to guide your refinement of data graphics.